Welcome to Medical Experts in Football. I'm Taiwo Adeshigbin, your host. Today's guest hails from Australia. If you ever see him in the airport in a hoodie, don't disturb him. Now, if you've never won a sprint, he's the person to race, considering he might have 100% slow twitch fibers. And I didn't say that, he said that. He's a sports scientist with 2 PhDs. He's known around the world not only for the acute on chronic load, but for his extensive research about load management. He's worked with top soccer clubs around the world like Barcelona, assisted with high level Olympic athletes, and he's presented all around the world. His drive to work in a sports medicine setting was enough for someone who never really knew what he wanted to do. For those who want to advance their knowledge about sports performance and load management, he's the guy to check out, Tim Gabbett. You can find him on Instagram, Gabbett Tim, on the website Gabbett Performance, where there are a number of online courses, consultations, and workshops to advance your clinical expertise. So be sure to check it out and don't miss out. Is there a state in the United States that reminds you of Australia in some ways?
Look, off the top of my head, not really. Like they're so unique. Like even in the States, um, you go to New York and it's its own state. There's nothing like New York. And I've spent time in smaller areas in North Carolina. That are it's a different place.
What about the weather? How is
Okay.
the weather in Australia, and how would you like, is there a state that you felt like, man, this is like similar weather to
Mm.
Australia?
Oh, look, in Brisbane, it's hot and humid. So Florida is like that for me. The winters in Florida are kind of like Brisbane in that it's not particularly cold, and when it's summer, it's 100 degrees, you're 100 degrees, and very humid.
So Tim, what's an item that you can't travel without? What's an item you must have on your trips besides all of your readings and your presentations?
Well, there's probably two things that come to mind. The first is I have a cricket ball, sort of like a baseball, um, that I like. I just like to roll on sometimes if if I'm in a plane for a long time and I get to the hotel, I just like to roll on it and get my hips moving again. Um, but I also have a hoodie. So when I fly, it's just a little habit that I've got when it's time for me, when I think I've watched enough movies or whatever, and I'm feeling tired, then I'll have some music in the hoodie right over my head, and I can sleep pretty well. I can sleep for probably 6 hours straight.
Is there something special about that particular hoodie?
No, it could be any hoodie, as long as it's kind of like a little thing where I'm tucking myself away in my little cocoon, and whoever your air hostesses and that are walking down, it's kind of like a little tip. Okay, don't bother him. he's he's in his own little world.
I like that. I would totally wear a hoodie because of that. And that is why I have headphones sometimes when I want to work. I'm like, just don't disturb me right now. That's
Yeah.
interesting. You were ranked 21st, rankings for the research and expertscape. And you mentioned how it's an important piece of the puzzle to know I can offer the best information to the teams, players, and coaches I work with. But my real enjoyment comes from seeing my athletes and coaches succeed. In your eyes, what makes you feel like the athlete has been successful?
There's different ways of measuring success. There's different ways of measuring performance. So for me, a big part is that success is about getting athletes to do things that they previously couldn't do, or they previously thought they couldn't do. And you see it. You see it when you start a session and they get spat out the back, and then over time more and more of the players, a larger percentage of the players are starting to attack that session. They're starting to win the session, and they do it on a regular basis. And then you see the entire group doing it, and then you've got a team on your hands. You've got a very hungry team because they've worked really hard to get to where they are. That to me is a measure of success.
So you mentioned how you obviously you want the team to be successful. I saw that you've been to Barcelona, you've worked with them, it seems for quite some years. You even have your own jersey. Why do you think Barcelona, besides having some of the most talented players around the world, what sets them apart? And I know people have this argument now. They're like, "Oh, Barcelona, they're no good anymore." But they still have something about their team that's different.
Their motto translates from Spanish to English. I think it translates to more than a club, or more than a team. There's a type of family component to Barcelona. There's people that I've interacted with and met and interacted with over a long period of time, where they are kind of like family. They're very good people. They look after other people well. When it comes to having dinner with a particular staff member, it's not just dinner with the staff member. Typically, you're having dinner with his kids and the family as well. So it's and you end up learning a lot about their kids, and just through over dinner, they're telling you about how they like playing soccer, or it's a pretty cool environment. People that I've met there are a little different from other professional teams. Not all professional teams, but some professional teams aren't as welcoming as others. Barcelona I've found to be very welcoming.
And for some people that may never get the chance to be at one of those games, can you just paint a picture and tell us the feeling, what it's like to be in that stand watching?
Probably the English game is an interesting one, where I've been to a lot of games in England. Crystal Palace, the guys from Crystal Palace always look after me if I ever want to go to a game, and typically I'm just in with the crowd there, and it's a different atmosphere from anything I experience at home, because it's no one's safe. They're all quite ecstatic supporters. They're a little bit on the crazy side, but no one is safe. So typically they'll pick someone out of the crowd, and you'll be the person they pick for a period of time. Then they'll pick someone else. The songs, there's a lot of songs that they sing, and that's always a lot of fun too.
Tim, I couldn't help but get hungry reading a quote that you said. You said, everyone talks about doing the 1%ers, but all those 1%ers don't get much if you're doing the other 99% poorly. Get the cake right before adding the sprinkles on the top. What do you mean by that?
Well, it sounds like something I'd say. Well, look, in elite sport, I think a lot of people do talk about, it's all about the 1%. When you are getting most things right, then it is just about tweaking a few things and just making sure that you get that last little bit right. But if you just focus on the 1%ers, it takes a lot to add up to 100%. We want to get the big rocks in place first, and the big rocks for me are getting a good training program in place, making sure you prepare well, making sure you hydrate well, you get a healthy diet in place, you sleep well. They're big rocks. Then a much smaller rock would be supplementation. If you're eating well, then you probably, supplements might help a little bit, but they're 1%. And a different way of saying it would be, if you didn't do the 99% well, if you didn't get your training program in place, then those supplements aren't going to help you run faster or jump higher or be a better soccer player.
As a sports scientist, how would you apply that same concept to your research and everything you do?
There's a lot of interesting questions out there, but just because they're interesting doesn't make them important. if I'm looking into research, I really only look at projects that are going to make a difference for athletes. So, and a big part of that is understanding the sport, and understanding sport in general, but then understanding the sport.
And for you, what are some important areas you look at and say, yeah, this can make a meaningful change for the athlete or the team's performance?
Well, it varies from sport to sport again. When I talk about sport and athletes, I'm not always talking about athletes in competitions. The athletes that I'm talking about could be military performers. It could be artists in the circus or in the ballet, where winning takes on a different context. It's not outscoring your opponent or running faster than your opponent. Winning is putting on the perfect show, or winning is making sure that you're able to do the job when you're deployed and get out of there as safely as possible. The biggest thing for me is making sure that those athletes or artists or performers are adequately prepared for what they're required to do. And this one is the biggest rock, I think, that we still haven't we're not mastering it, and in a lot of cases we're a long way away from mastering it. For all of those examples, you need the coaches, the sports medicine, the strength and conditioning staff all working together, and you need the athlete on board with the process.
Okay, let's talk about your work with the professional athletes. We all know there's a grind being a professional athlete, but the medical staff that supports the team is putting in a lot of work. You mentioned after matches, you would still go home and watch film, and you could be up till 2 in the morning. Tim, I want you to be honest with me. When you're that tired watching film, what is going through your mind working that late?
If I'm honest, there's sometimes where I would be saying this is not for me. Yeah, I think there's sometimes where I'm going, look, the team needs this. I'm doing this for the team, and I'm feeling okay. I'm gonna get this done. The coach is going to have it on his desk when he walks into his office tomorrow. The athletes are going to have all their footage cut up. But then, if I'm honest, there's other times where at that point in time, it's not just one 2 a.m. shift. It's a lot of the time they're like a marathon of games in pro sport, and they just come back to back, and they're coming at you all the time. You finish one analysis, and you take a breath for a minute, and it's like a Homer Simpson when he got to sleep for a minute. You're up and at it again. So yeah, there's times where you just go, look, this is way too hard. Like if you're looking for validation from the athletes, or if you're looking for validation from the coach and staff, then you're looking in the wrong place. A lot of the time, their heads are full with their own challenges. So they get the results, they look at the results, but a lot of the times they don't really appreciate how much work has gone into it. They don't realize that you've been up till all hours in the morning analyzing it. I think one of the lessons you have to learn is you have to recognize the inherent value in your work, and you've got to treat it as this is valuable information. This is helping the team. If it's not helping the team, then it's helping a particular athlete who is engaging with it. Or if it's not helping the head coach, it's maybe helping one of the assistants, or it's helping the sports medicine team understand loading a little bit better, or the performance staff. So you can't be waiting for a pat on the back, because if you're waiting for that, then you'll be waiting a long time.
At what point of your career did you realize the information you were finding could provide value to a team?
People were starting to reach out probably around 2010, 2011, from all over the world. People may not have read the research, but they just wanted to know, I want to tap into your practical experience. I can read the papers, but I want to just talk to you. And that to me was it's been ongoing for a while now. So the first thing I want to do is just have a conversation with them. So if I get an email and I offer them the opportunity to hop on a call to talk through the problem, and I don't hear back, then that's a pretty good indication that they're probably going to waste my time. So I don't waste my time if I don't, if people aren't serious, I'm not going to waste my time, and I'm not going to waste their time. But if we can get on a call, typically what I would do is try and get a better understanding of their particular issue. The kind of things that their challenges at that point in time, the kind of problem that they want to solve. That just gets my brain ticking over as well. Like straight away, I'm starting to think of, okay, I'm trying to put myself in their position, I guess, and once I've kind of inserted myself in that position, I start to, I get my problem solving hat on, and I'm going, okay, I get stimulated by that, I get pumped up by that, and I start, I start engaging it, and I'm kind of, it's like a fish on a hook almost, like all right, I've got to solve this problem.
So we're going to go back in time. Tim, as a 15-year-old, what did you envision your career to be?
As a 15-year-old, I don't know that I would have had too many clear plans in my head. I was probably like most 15-year-olds, a bit confused, probably a bit moody, and I always was involved in sport. Did I think I'd be able to make a career out of sport and working with different types of athletes? I don't think that was probably in my head at that point. I always liked it, and I've always enjoyed the training process. At that point in time, I was doing a lot of martial arts. So I probably saw myself as being a martial arts instructor, and somehow making $1 million as a martial arts instructor. But it obviously didn't come to fruition. Well, not the first part did. I did instruct martial arts for a little while. The making $1 million didn't happen.
So what were all the sports you played?
Oh, everything. I played. I was probably best with running, middle distance and long distance running. But I in Australia, we grow up in summer. We play cricket. Everyone plays cricket, whether you like it or not. You have played it. I played rugby league. Is a big sport on the east coast of Australia. I played a lot of soccer. As a kid as well, so lots of team sports, but as an individual sport, I did taekwondo, and I did a lot of running as well.
Cool. So what position did you play in soccer?
I was a right defender.
Right defender.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, they'd probably put me on the right side because my left foot was so poor.
What was your strength as a right defender?
Oh, look, in terms of my strength for any of my sports, I wasn't the most gifted athlete. I wasn't the most skillful, and I wasn't the fastest. I often joke that I could have been anything if I wasn't born with 100% slow twitch fibers.
I heard that.
yeah, and just an ounce of skill, it would have been great. The thing that I had going for me as a defender was, and the three defenders we had there, we were aggressive. We defended our goalie like our lives depended on it. I didn't achieve great success as an athlete. Moderate level success as an athlete, but what I did achieve came on the back of hard work and effort. So, if I was a defender in soccer, or if I was in a race, a cross country race, you didn't beat me based on effort. You beat me because you were just better. You had more ability than me, but it wouldn't be effort that let me down, or a lack of effort.
At what point did you realize you wanted to become a sports scientist?
Yeah, no, when I left school, I intentionally had a few years off. and I didn't go to university straight away. And part of the reason was the courses that I wanted to do I couldn't get into. My scores just weren't good enough to get into them. I worked just a few labouring type jobs and some pretty boring, mundane kind of repetitive jobs, and that was a pretty big kick in the butt to say, like, you don't want to be doing this for the rest of your life. What are you looking at doing? And then, I looked around, and there were, at that point in time, I was more heavily involved in my spare time training athletes, and involved in playing and training, and it kind of was a natural progression. One, I needed to get out of what I was doing, because it just wasn't stimulating at all. And two, it was kind of a logical thing to try this. It was one of the ones I could get into, but it was something that I was pretty interested in as well. So yeah, once I eventually got into university, it sort of just one thing led to another, and that's where I ended up.
What was your bachelor's degree in?
That was in sports science.
Sports science. Okay.
Yeah, it was kind of a funny road. I did sports science, and then for a few years, when I did my graduate study, my postgraduate research, in those days there was less flexibility in what you could do. Basically, the supervisor would dictate to you, well, this is the project that I'm prepared to supervise. So I went down a path that was completely away from where I am now. And to be fair, not really something that I was really passionate about. But I did it for 4 or 5 years, and kind of slogged my way through it, and then got out the other end of that, and pretty much just went back to what I wanted to do, which was work in sports. So from that point in time, I never actually went into a hospital setting for long. I worked in a hospital setting for a little while, but the clinical setting in the role I was doing just wasn't that appealing to me. So I just went straight back into sport again.
A degree under your belt, and now you're starting graduate school. What did you see yourself doing then? Or were you still confused?
Yeah, look, even then, like, if you ask me now, what am I going to do when I grow up? I'll probably say, look, I don't know. Because I'm really not a great planner at all. So I was very passionate about sports. So, and I was working part time with a lot of teams. So I was doing the research, but I was also working with teams. And at that point in time, when I was working part time with the teams, and it was hardly any money, I was treating those part time jobs like a full time job, because that was how passionate I was about it. So, the things we were able to do with part time teams with no money, it's really quite cool what we did. So I think I was always probably thinking, look, I'll get through this PhD process, and I'll have a few more options. So one of the options, I guess, is to work in a university setting, lecture and do research. My main goal was to be working in elite sport, in professional sport.
So, what is it that you enjoy about working in that athletic environment?
I like working with people who, what we're trying to do is every day we're trying to stretch them a little bit further and get them doing things that they previously couldn't do, or previously thought they couldn't do. And I'm not only talking about athletes now, I'm talking about the coaches that I work with as well, and trying to bring out some of the skills that they have that they may not realize they have. That's probably the thing I like most. In a team environment, if I'm talking about a soccer team, then I like when you get a group of people together who are working hard towards a common goal, and there's that galvanizing effect where everyone has bought into what we're trying to do, and they're all pulling each other along to get better. I really enjoy that part as well.
You mentioned how you worked for very little pay and it was all about passion. Now you got one PhD, you worked a couple years, and then you went back to get another PhD. Is that passion or is that just craziness? What were you thinking when you got two PhDs?
Yeah, you're right. That's just crazy. That's not passion. That's just I'm just a glutton for punishment. No, look, if there's no reason why anyone should have a second PhD, and if someone said to me, I'm thinking about going back and doing a second PhD, I would say, well, look, just really consider whether that's really what you want to do. The reason I did the second PhD was I was working in pro sport, and as part of my role there, it had a research role. So I was doing, and when I say research, I'm not talking test tubes and lab coats. It was just the research is like little projects to try and to work out better ways to teach skill, or to work out the demands of the sport, and are we training to meet those demands. So it was all just the kind of almost like just general sports science support that you provide to the team. But we just built projects around the team. So I was writing a few papers, and then I thought about it, and I thought it'd be really nice when I move on from this sport. It's inevitable that I'll probably move on from this sport. That whoever comes in next, whoever follows me in this team or in a different team, they can look at what has been done in the sport, and they can build on that rather than just going back and doing the exact same thing. So that was a completely different experience. So the guys who supervised me were essentially friends of mine, that I'd known. I'd been out a fair while by then. So we were friends, and it was a completely different experience. It was just three friends writing papers together and having a bit of a laugh. It was, and I was a lot further along the process as well, so probably didn't need the same type of guidance that I would have needed the first time around. If you want to be a researcher and you want to be a research scientist, then definitely look to a PhD. The training that you get and the qualifications that you get, it does open a lot of doors for you. It'll help you a lot.
For someone listening who has aspirations to become a researcher, what advice would you give them when considering a PhD program?
The first thing you want to do is read a lot. So don't go into a program and expect everything to be given to you. Have an idea of the kind of things that you're interested in. So if you're interested in a particular topic and you've read a lot around that topic, then and if that's something that you would like to follow through in your research, then the next thing to do is to try and find a supervisor or a group of supervisors who are knowledgeable and preferably leaders in the field, but also have the ability, have the experience to be able to supervise you to a good completion, where you can design some good projects, you can get them published, and you can come out the other side with some real skills. But you want to make sure that if you're spending 3 or 4 years with a person, that the expectations are really clear, that from both sides, what you expect from them and what they expect from you, but also that you can get along with them. Because if you're spending 3 or 4 years with them and you don't get along, then it makes for a really tough time for you. Make sure you go into it with the fire in your belly, because it is a long process. And a lot of people just say, oh, look, I'm just going to collect a whole heap of data and I'm just going to write all these papers up. And look, it just doesn't work like that. It takes time to read through the research and find the gaps. It takes time to design your projects. collect it, analyze it, write it up, get the rejections that you get. So be prepared to get a lot of knockbacks along the way and have to jump through a lot of hoops or over a lot of hurdles. And even when you submit the thesis and think that's the last thing you have to do, be prepared for some more hurdles that'll come after it comes back. Changes or something the university asks you to do. There's always something until you get that final piece of paper. There will be always something that'll be there to kind of test you. It's a test of endurance.
Now, I know you said you're not a planner, but I imagine that there was some thought that came with your acute chronic workload research. Where were you when you decided to initiate that project?
The first project we did we started it around 2012. And at that point in time, we'd seen there was some research starting to come out that high chronic loads were associated with lower injury risk. And that went against the textbook, that higher workloads were associated with lower risk, because everyone at that point in time was believing that high loads caused injuries. Now, a few things happened along the way. One was the training injury prevention paradox paper was rejected in 2010. It was rejected outright in 2010. Now, it got accepted in 2016, but most people don't realise that it got rejected 6 years earlier, and it was essentially the same paper, saying that we need to train hard because it might actually be like a vaccine against injury. But the difference was, or the big question was, how do we get to those high loads? So we can't just go from 0 to 100 to get to high loads. How do we get there? And at that point in time, the sports medicine community was saying, this sounds like survival of the fittest. That's not what sports medicine is about. So that was kind of the feeling in 2010. So around 2012, we started thinking, well, there's got to be a way to build to these high loads. The 10% rule, or the 10% guide, is really just a guide. It doesn't take into account capacity. So how can we get an estimate of capacity, or the athlete's ability to tolerate load? And maybe it's not so much that load is a problem. Maybe it's the load that our athletes are prepared for. And that's when things started to change a little bit in our mind, is that high loads were actually a good thing, but it's the way that you get to those high loads that's pretty important. Now, there was also, down another stream, a performance stream, Andy Coggan with Training Peaks. It's a software that a lot of cyclists use. He was using a similar concept with training stress balance, which basically looks at acute and chronic loads as well, but relates it to performance. So what we'd done is taken that model, or a version of that model, and applied it to a negative outcome, being injury. And that's where we started to realize that it's essentially progressive overload, but the idea is what we're doing is loading relative to someone's capacity. We're not just loading indiscriminately and saying, take this and see how you feel.
When you're focused, zoned in, what's your environment like? Paint a picture for me.
Typically, I just lock myself away, and normally I would just focus on the job. It's probably just a way that I've done it over a long period of time. There's some pros and cons of that approach, right? So when I need to go into that mode, I can go into it pretty easily. The negatives of it are when I go to a game and I'm not working. If I was just there with my sons, for example, at a game, then I find it very hard to just relax and enjoy the game. I'm always kind of looking at where the team is in terms of field position. I find myself counting plays as well. So subconsciously, I'm probably counting how quickly the tackle is going. So if it's a slow tackle or a fast tackle, So I'm not just screaming like a fan and enjoying it, which is really hard. I think I probably
can't flip that switch, huh?
well, I probably can if I have a couple of drinks beforehand.
What's your go-to drink?
I don't really drink a lot, but I'll have a beer. If you ask me what years ago, it would have been a beer, but lately my wife and I have been trying a few different wines.
You seem fairly knowledgeable about a lot of sports. Are your kids like that too?
Well, they were all involved in sport, and my two boys, they spent a lot of time with me at work at different times. So if my wife was working and I was working, she couldn't take them to her work, so I would take them to my work, and they just hang out with me. Either look, they've got some horror stories of dressing rooms, and they've got like we were doing a talent ID project for women's soccer, and my youngest son, he was so young, but he was chasing the balls. Like they kicked the balls past the goals, and he was chasing the balls and bringing them back. And I remember taking him home, and he was as red as a tomato, because he'd been out in the sun all day, and I got in so much trouble for that. But
So if you have an Olympic athlete that is coming to your clinic, maybe it's a sport that you maybe have seen a couple times, you're not too familiar with the mechanics, what's your process like before actually working with that athlete?
it depends. It depends on the problem. I can give you a lot of different examples of, there was one where I worked with, it was mostly with a cycling coach and their physio, and the athlete was getting a lot of neural pain whenever she got on the rollers. And so the rollers are just something that she would do in preparation for her race. Now, as it turned out, just through asking a few questions, and this is just using a simple Socratic approach, similar to what you're doing now, is it turns out that she'd had a bit of a fall, and when I asked about the fall, this little bit of a fall, it turns out that she'd had a massive concussion in a race that resulted in a lot of dizziness. She took half the track into her shoulder, so a big. They said a splinter in her shoulder. I said, well, how big was the splinter? And they said, oh, it was about this big. So it's not like a little splinter in your finger; it's a massive chunk of wood. And as time went on, as we asked more questions, we started to realise that this was probably not a physical problem. There was, or a biological tissue issue. There wasn't tissue damage. There was a lot of psychological trauma associated with this event. And every time she got on the rollers where she was feeling pain, she associated the rollers with that negative event of coming off and causing a lot of damage. So we had to find a way to still get those rollers, still get her being able to race, and realize and kind of associate the rollers with some positive things. It manifested in a physical problem, but a big part of it is just asking questions and trying to find out what makes the athlete tick, and or some of the things that are a stumbling block from helping them go faster.
I've noticed you often say it's important to ask those hard questions. As a scientist today, what are some of those hard questions you are asking yourself to challenge yourself day in and day out?
Well, look, I think if we look at the training load area, I've been doing this stuff for 25 years now, and the more I learn, the less I feel I know. The more I dig into it, the more I go, someone will ask a really good question, and I'll kind of racking my brain trying to work out, why don't I know the answer to this, and they're all kind of a lot of it is because we don't. There's a whole heap we don't know about training load, and part of it is because a lot of the things that we'd like to know we just can't measure at the moment. So if we want to understand local tissue loads and progressing load through rehab, it's very difficult to do because pain is not a great guide to progression. It's not a great guide to the function of the tissue. If we want to measure external loads, it's very difficult to measure external loads for some tissues in the field. We can do it in the lab, but it's very hard to do it in the field. So we know that progressive overload is important, but how do we do it? How do we do it in rehab if we can't quantify it? So there's a whole heap of questions that are going around in my head, and I'm all I can do is kind of say, well, this is a question I'm asking it. If I'm asking it, probably someone else is as well. Is there some researcher out there that is interested in this, that can help solve it, or can help answer these questions for us? We're never ever going to solve all of these questions. It'd be pretty boring if we knew everything about every topic. So I just wake up, take a breath, and just accept the fact that I'm going to learn something new today, and that's a good place to be.
Tim, I'm curious, your journey to working for professional teams, you mentioned how you took upon a lot of jobs that weren't paying as much. During that time, like, could you see your future of you being one of the most sought after sports scientists, getting calls from all these sports teams? And then were there people, I guess, in your life that thought, man, you're kind of crazy to be doing this on top of working, right? Because it looked like you still worked another job after all of that.
In terms of seeing myself where I am now, I don't know if I ever could really see it. Like perhaps I could. It's a bit hard to say, but back then it was a completely different time, in that the pathway towards elite sport wasn't clear. And for the most part, those jobs in pro sport were taken by the fittest player in the team who had just retired. So, well, he was fit, so he must be a good trainer. We'll give him the job of training the players. That was the kind of approach, and it's not that long ago that things have evolved. Let's say 15 years it started to evolve, but it wasn't, maybe even 10 or 8 years ago, people were still getting those roles based on the fact that they were fit players. So it wasn't always that clear that I'd ever get into pro sport. But things started to change, and coaches started to realise that, and teams started to realise they had to move with the times. That there was that while these ex-players do have a role in sport, and it may not be that particular role. And in terms of your second question, did people think I was crazy? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you're putting a lot of, like, I put a lot of time into stuff that was above and beyond the job, and above and beyond the small amount of pay that I was getting for that. And if I said to you that I had the balance right all the time, and I always had the balance between family and work, I always had that under control, I'd be lying, because there were times where it was way out of whack. And when you're sitting up till 2:00 in the morning analyzing video, or when you're going the extra mile for a team that is paying you nowhere near the amount of money you should be earning for the amount of work you're doing, like, people, of course, were going, look, this is crazy what you're doing. This is over the top. Now, if I look back and I go, well, would things have been different? Would I have ended at this point in time where I am now if I hadn't have done those things, or if I'd taken a different approach? Or, I mean, who knows? Who knows what would have happened? I'm fortunate enough that I've still got a good relationship with everyone in my family, and we're still together as a family. So so I'm pretty lucky in that respect that I've had the support of a wonderful partner, and my kids have been great. I'm also pretty mindful that sport can suck you in and spit you back out, and leave you and your family broken.
And during a tough moment for you and your family, maybe when you didn't have that balance, what helped you all get through that?
My wife is probably the strongest person I know, and she's very honest and direct. She lets me know when like when I'm getting too passionate about something, or I'm a lot better at it now than I was when I was starting out, and I guess that just comes with experience. But there's still times where we've got to help each other out with that, because we're both pretty driven people. We have high standards of ourselves, and we want to do a good job.
Okay, so you have been to a lot of the major tournaments that I hope to eventually go to, like the Olympics, World Cup. Have you traveled to almost every country now, or not quite?
Yeah, I've been to
Every continent, I know that, right?
Yeah, that's right. I've been to a lot of different countries. So if you said the country, chances are I've been there. Now, in saying that, when you're working with a team, you get to see a lot of airports, a lot of hotels, and a lot of competition venues. You actually don't get to see a lot of the country. So, I've been to those places, but the actual, even though there's lots and lots of countries, you could actually probably count on one hand the countries that I've actually had a chance to take a look around and walk down the street and see something nice.
Now, you had workshops scheduled, I want to say last year, in Florida, New York, many states, but the coronavirus kind of took the whole of at least a lot of the activities in the states in March. Did you have the chance to go to all of those states?
Yeah, that was in January. I started in Bradenton in Florida, and then went to New York. And at that stage, the pandemic was only starting to be mentioned, but it wasn't in the States by that stage. So I got all those workshops done in the States, and even then I went to Europe after that in March. So that was a bit different though, because coronavirus was really starting to kick off, and everywhere I went, they were closing the borders behind us. So it felt like we were being chased by
it. Well, you lucked out. When's the next time you're going to be in the States presenting? Or
we do have some stuff online, but ideally, if things can get under control, I'll be there in June. But that depends on a whole heap of things working out for us. We've got a couple of face-to-face workshops in Chicago and St. Louis, so it'd be nice to get there, just to feel a little bit of normality again. But if it doesn't happen, I'll just have to keep breathing a little bit longer and be okay with it.
Well, last question. In your 25 years, you gave quite a few advice, and there was one quote you said, "Things are never as good or bad as they seem." What is something that you have learned in your 25 years that you can pass on?
Well, look, probably it's the advice my dad keeps reminding me of, and it is you can't kick goals while you're sitting in the grandstand. If you want to get in the game, if you want to be in the game, then get in the game. It takes a bit of risk. It takes effort to actually get in the game. But if you sit in the grandstand, you don't get that same sort of feeling. So if you want to make a difference in sports medicine or anything in your life, like if you just do the best you can do at it. There was never that big a plan to be setting out to do what I'm doing. All I want to do is just help people and walk away from it eventually and go, well, I did the best I can do. You don't want to get to a point in your life and be saying, oh, I should have done this, or what if I done this? You don't want to die wondering. So just get in and have a crack and see where it takes you.
And that was Tim Gabbett, sports scientist.